The massive space station Concordia Prime floated in the dark void between star systems. It was built to be neutral ground, a place where different alien species could meet without fear. Today it hosted the most important gathering in 50 years, the first Galactic Peace Summit. President Elena Vasquez of Earth walked through the gleaming corridors toward the main assembly hall. Her dark hair was pulled back in a simple style, and she wore the blue and silver uniform of the United Earth Federation. Behind her walked 6 human delegates, their faces serious but hopeful. For 50 years, humanity had been part of the Galactic Concordat as junior members. They were allowed to trade, work, and live among the 12 alien species that ruled the galaxy. But humans were never treated as equals. They were seen as useful workers, good soldiers, and clever mechanics. Nothing more. Today, President Vasquez planned to change that. The assembly hall was enormous, with curved walls that rose up into darkness. 12 different alien species sat in their designated areas, each group looking very different from the others. The Zeltharians were tall and thin with purple skin and 4 arms. The Nexari looked like giant insects with gleaming black shells. The Thessians moved like a single organism, their pale bodies swaying together in perfect rhythm. At the center of the hall sat the Galactic Council's leadership table. Prime Minister Kethvar of the Zeltharians held the position of speaker this year. His long face showed no emotion as he watched the human delegation enter. President Vasquez took her place at the small podium reserved for junior members. She looked around the hall, knowing that billions of humans across Earth and the colonies were watching this moment on their screens. Honored members of the Galactic Concordat, she began, her voice clear and strong. I come before you today not as a supplicant, but as the representative of humanity, a species ready to take its place as full and equal partners in this galaxy. Several aliens made sounds that might have been laughter. Prime Minister Kethvar's thin lips curved into what humans would recognize as a sneer. The Galactic Council has reviewed humanity's request, Kethvar said, his voice cold and formal. We find your species adequate for your current role. There is no need for change. President Vasquez had expected this response. She had prepared for it. With respect, Prime Minister, I believe you underestimate what humanity brings to this galaxy. For 50 years we have been your workers, your soldiers, your traders. We have built your stations, fought your battles, and fixed your machines. We have done this faithfully and well. She paused, looking directly at each council member. But we have also been watching, learning, growing. Humanity is not the same species that first reached for the stars 50 years ago. We have evolved, adapted, and become something more than you realize. The hall fell silent. Several aliens shifted uncomfortably in their seats. You speak of evolution, said Counselor Thexali of the Nexari, her insect-like voice clicking and buzzing. But evolution takes millions of years. Humans are still the same primitive creatures we first encountered. President Vasquez smiled. It was not a friendly expression. That is where you are wrong, Counselor. Human evolution has never been about our bodies. It has always been about our minds, our tools, our ability to change our environment instead of letting it change us. In 50 years among you, we have learned more about the galaxy than some species learn in 1,000 years. Prime Minister Kethvar stood up from his chair, his forearms spread wide in a gesture of dismissal. Enough of this foolishness. Humanity will remain in its current status. You are useful to us as you are. We have no interest in treating children as adults. The insult hit its mark. President Vasquez felt her anger rise, but she kept her voice steady. Children, Prime Minister, we who built the quantum drives that power your fastest ships, we who developed the medical techniques that saved millions of Thessian lives during the plague years, we who stood with you against the void wraiths when other species fled in terror, you did those things because we allowed you to, Kethvar replied, because we guided you. Without us, humanity would still be trapped on its single world, fighting among themselves like the animals they truly are. The human delegates behind President Vasquez tensed. She could feel their anger, but she also felt their discipline. They were waiting for her signal. Prime Minister, she said quietly, you are making a mistake, a very serious mistake. Humanity has been patient because we believed in the possibility of peaceful cooperation. We believed that reason and goodwill could overcome prejudice and fear. But if you will not accept us as equals through diplomacy, she never finished the sentence. The shot came from the Nexari section. A small device no bigger than a human finger. fired a beam of purple energy that struck President Vasquez in the chest. She staggered, her eyes wide with shock, and then collapsed to the floor. The human delegates rushed to her side, but it was too late. The neural disruptor had stopped her heart instantly. In the sudden silence that followed, Prime Minister Kethvar looked down at the body with no emotion at all. "Let this be a lesson," he said calmly. "Humanity has forgotten its place in the galaxy. Perhaps this will remind them." The Nexari assassin, a warrior named Vextar, stood openly in his section. He made no attempt to hide or escape. The weapon was still smoking in his clawed hand. "The Council ordered this?" asked one of the human delegates, an older man named Marcus Rodriguez. "The Council does what is necessary to maintain order," Kethvar replied. "Your president spoke of evolution and change. But some things must never change. The natural hierarchy of species is one of them." Rodriguez knelt beside President Vasquez's body. When he looked up, his face was completely calm. This somehow seemed more frightening than if he had been screaming. "I see," he said quietly. "Thank you for clarifying the situation, Prime Minister. Humanity will remember this lesson." The human delegation gathered around their fallen leader. They lifted her body with careful dignity and walked toward the exit. Not one of them looked back at the alien council. As they left, the aliens returned to their normal business as if nothing important had happened. They discussed trade routes and mining rights. They argued about territorial boundaries and resource allocation. President Vasquez's death was already becoming a footnote in their minds. But across the galaxy, in every human home, workplace, and military base, billions of people had watched their leader die. They had seen the casual cruelty, the complete lack of respect, the dismissive attitude that treated human life as worthless. On Earth, in the command centers of Luna Base, in the mining colonies of the asteroid belt, in the research stations orbiting distant stars, humanity watched and learned. They saw exactly what their alien neighbors thought of them. In the depths of space, automated communication networks began transmitting coded messages. Supply ships changed course toward hidden rendezvous points. Military units received new orders that had been prepared years in advance, orders that most commanders never expected to use. The galaxy had just taught humanity a lesson, but it was not the lesson the aliens intended to teach. As the human delegation's ship departed from Concordia Prime, Marcus Rodriguez stood in the observation deck looking back at the station. He held a communication device in his hand. After a long moment, he activated it and spoke 3 words. "Execute Protocol 7. Across the galaxy, humanity began to move. Silence fell across the galaxy like a heavy blanket. For exactly 72 hours after President Vasquez's assassination, every human settlement, ship, and station went completely quiet. No human spoke to an alien. No human answered communication requests. No human reported for work. They simply stopped. On the trade station Bellhaven, where humans made up 60% of the maintenance crew, the Zeltharian station master Velkoth paced nervously in his office. His forearms gestured frantically as he tried to contact the human supervisors. "This is unacceptable," he complained to his assistant. "The primary reactor needs calibration, and only the humans know the proper sequences. The waste recycling system is showing warning signs. If they don't return to work soon, we could face a complete system failure." His assistant, a young Zeltharian named Porthal, looked worried. "Perhaps we should contact the Galactic Council? They could order the humans back to work." Velkoth made a dismissive gesture. "The Council is not concerned with operational details. They expect us to manage these labor disputes ourselves. Send a message to Earth. Remind them of their contracts and obligations." But Earth wasn't answering. Neither were the mining colonies in the Crab Nebula, where human engineers operated the deep core extraction equipment that fed the galaxy's shipbuilding industry. The Koran warriors who owned those mines found themselves staring at silent machinery they didn't understand. On the military base, Fortress Prime, General Thaxel of the Nexari military discovered that his human technical staff had vanished overnight. The advanced targeting computers, communication networks, and weapon maintenance systems all required human expertise. Without them, his mighty fortress was little more than an expensive piece of space junk. Across the galaxy, the same pattern repeated. Humans simply weren't there anymore. They hadn't left their posts in anger or protest. They had just stopped. They remained in their quarters, their settlements, their ships, but they didn't work, didn't respond, didn't engage. The silence was more terrifying than any threat. On Earth, in a hidden bunker beneath the Swiss Alps, Acting President Marcus Rodriguez sat in a circular room with 12 other people. They called themselves the Shadow Council, though no one outside this room knew they existed. "Status report," Rodriguez said quietly. Admiral Sarah Chen, a small woman with steel-gray hair and sharp eyes, activated a holographic display. "All human assets have withdrawn as planned. Critical infrastructure across 14 star systems is now experiencing cascading failures. The aliens are beginning to panic." "Casualties?" asked Dr. James Murphy, Earth's chief xenobiologist. "None on our side," Admiral Chen replied. "We've avoided any actions that could be seen as direct violence. Everything appears to be technical malfunctions or coincidental timing." Dr. Maya Patel, the head of Human Intelligence Services, leaned forward. "Our embedded agents report increasing confusion among alien leadership. They can't understand what's happening. Some think it's a massive equipment failure. Others suspect sabotage but can't prove it." Rodriguez nodded slowly. These people had been planning for this day for 20 years. While the aliens saw humanity as simple and straightforward, the Shadow Council had been playing a much deeper game. "Dr. Murphy," Rodriguez said, "report on the psychological profiles." Dr. Murphy touched his tablet and new data appeared on the hologram. For 50 years he had studied every alien species in the Concordat. Not just their biology, but their psychology, their fears, their weaknesses. "The Zeltharians are hierarchical," he explained. "They panic when their chain of command breaks down. We've targeted their communication relays to create confusion in their leadership structure. The Nexari value military strength above all else," he continued. "They're discovering that their weapons are useless without human maintenance. Their pride is becoming their weakness. The Thessians think as a collective. Disrupting their network connections is like blinding them. They literally cannot function as a society when isolated. Each alien species was facing problems designed specifically for them. The proud Quran warriors were being embarrassed by equipment failures in front of their enemies. The merchant Valtari were losing massive amounts of money as their trade networks collapsed. The scientific Eldrith were watching their research stations shut down one by one. "How long can we maintain this?" asked Colonel Lisa Torres, the head of Special Operations. "As long as necessary," Admiral Chen replied. "We've been preparing for decades. Our people know their roles. They'll hold position until we give the word." Rodriguez stood and walked to a wall display showing the galaxy. Red dots marked every location where humans had significant presence. There were thousands of them. "The aliens made a critical error," he said slowly. "They thought our integration into their society was a sign of weakness. They saw our cooperation as submission. They believed that spreading us across the galaxy would make us dependent on them." He turned back to the council. "They were wrong. Our integration was reconnaissance. Our cooperation was camouflage. And spreading us across the galaxy, that gave us access to everything." Dr. Patel activated another display. "For 50 years, every human worker, engineer, and technician has been gathering intelligence. We know how their governments work, how their militaries operate, how their economies function. We know their trade routes, their military bases, their research facilities. More importantly," added Dr. Murphy, "we know their psychology. We understand what makes each species tick, their fears, their desires, their breaking points." Rodriguez returned to his seat. "They wanted to teach us our place in the galaxy. Very well. Let's show them what that place really is." Admiral Chen touched her communicator. "All units, this is command. Proceed to Phase 2. Across the galaxy, the human silence continued. But now it was accompanied by something else. Small things at first: navigation computers that gave slightly wrong readings, environmental systems that ran too hot or too cold, communication delays that made coordination difficult. On the Zeltharian capital world, Prime Minister Kethavar was beginning to realize the scope of the problem. His assistant brought him reports from across their territory. "Sir, we've lost contact with 47 mining operations. The fusion plants on 6 worlds are operating at reduced capacity. Our military bases are reporting equipment malfunctions across all systems." Kethavar's forearms moved in agitation. "This cannot be coincidence. The humans are behind this somehow." "But how, sir? We've monitored all human communications. There's been no coordination, no planning. They just stopped working." Kethavar stared at the reports. Somewhere in the back of his mind, a terrible thought was beginning to form. What if the humans had been planning this for years? What if their apparent simplicity was an act? What if humanity was far more dangerous than anyone realized? On Earth, the 72 hours of silence were ending. Rodriguez stood before a camera preparing to address the galaxy. His message would go out on all frequencies in all languages. "People of the galaxy," he began, his voice calm and steady. "3 days ago you murdered our leader in cold blood. You did this to teach us our place in your civilization. You wanted to remind us that we are inferior, that we exist only to serve you." He paused, looking directly into the camera. "Thank you for the lesson. We have learned it well. We now understand exactly what you think of us. We know precisely how you view our species, and we have decided to respond accordingly." He smiled, but it wasn't a pleasant expression. "You wanted to show us our place? Very well. Let us show you yours." The message ended, and across the galaxy humanity began to move again, but not as they had before. This time they moved with purpose. This time they moved as predators. The war began without a single shot being fired. Across the galaxy, humans returned to their jobs with quiet smiles and polite apologies. They explained that grief had overwhelmed them, but they were ready to work again. The aliens, relieved to have their essential workers back, quickly forgave what they saw as an emotional outburst. They had no idea what was really happening. On the trade route between Zeltharian Prime and the Karan mining worlds, cargo ship Captain Mike Harrison checked his navigation computer one more time. The route had been programmed by his human crew, just as it had been for the past 5 years. But today, there was a small difference in the calculations. A minor error that would add 3 days to the journey and route the ship through an area known for plasma storms. "Course laid in, Captain," reported his navigator, a cheerful woman named Susan Park. "Thank you, Lieutenant," Captain Harrison replied. He was actually human too, though his Zeltharian employers didn't know that. His false identity had been carefully constructed years ago. The ship jumped to hyperspace, carrying vital medical supplies to the Karan colonies. It would arrive late, damaged, and with half its cargo spoiled. The Karan warriors would blame Zeltharian incompetence, further straining their alliance. This scene played out hundreds of times across the galaxy. Human workers, technicians, and pilots began making tiny mistakes. Nothing obvious, nothing that could be traced back to sabotage. Just small errors that caused delays, equipment damage, and growing frustration among the alien species. On the research station Kepler-7, Dr. James Wong worked in the Alien Computer Systems Lab. He was officially a junior technician, but he actually held 3 advanced degrees in quantum computing. For 2 years, he had been maintaining the station's central processing unit, the brain that controlled everything from life support to experimental equipment. Today, Dr. Wong made a small adjustment to the error-checking protocols. The computer would now interpret certain commands incorrectly about 1% of the time. Not enough to cause a system crash, but enough to ruin experiments, corrupt data, and drive the alien scientists to distraction. Dr. Wong called his supervisor, a tall Elderith scientist named Kreloth. "The particle accelerator is giving strange readings again. Can you check the control systems?" "Of course, sir," Dr. Wong replied with perfect courtesy. He spent an hour running diagnostics, then reported that everything appeared normal. He didn't mention that he had programmed the accelerator to randomly fluctuate its power output by tiny amounts. The Elderith's precious research into dimensional physics would now take years longer to complete. In the military sector, the sabotage was even more sophisticated. Sergeant Maria Santos worked in the weapons maintenance bay of the Nexari battlecruiser Deathbringer. She was responsible for calibrating the ship's main cannon array, a job that required precise timing and careful attention to detail. Over the past week, Sergeant Santos had been making microscopic adjustments to the cannon targeting systems. The weapons would still fire accurately at stationary targets during tests, but in actual combat, when shooting at moving ships, the cannons would miss by several meters. The proud Nexari warriors would find themselves mysteriously unable to hit their enemies. "Sergeant Santos," barked Commander Vexkar, the same Nexari who had assassinated President Vasquez. "The gunnery crews report excellent test results. Your maintenance work is satisfactory." "Thank you, sir," Santos replied, keeping her expression neutral. She had volunteered for this assignment specifically because she wanted to work on Vexcar's ship. When the shooting war finally began, she planned to be there personally to watch his weapons fail. The most devastating attacks were psychological. Dr. James Murphy had spent decades studying alien behavior, and he had shared his knowledge with carefully selected human agents across the galaxy. On the Thessian homeworld, maintenance worker Robert Chen worked in the Planetary Communication Center. The Thessians were a hive-minded species that depended on constant mental connection to function. Their communication network was their nervous system. Robert had identified the specific frequency patterns that the Thessians used for emotional regulation. By introducing tiny amounts of static at precisely the right moments, he could make the entire population feel anxious, confused, or depressed. The Thessians didn't understand what was happening to them. They just knew that something felt wrong. The Koran warriors faced a different kind of attack. Their society was built on honor and reputation. Human agents working in their media networks began subtly altering combat records and military reports. A great victory would be reported as a minor skirmish. A heroic last stand would be described as a tactical retreat. The proud warriors found their achievements being minimized and their failures being exaggerated. Meanwhile, the merchant Valtari were losing money at an alarming rate. Human accountants and trade analysts working for Valtari companies began making small errors in their calculations. A profitable trade route would be declared unprofitable due to mathematical mistakes. Investment opportunities would be missed because of delayed reports. The Valtari's legendary business sense was failing them, and they couldn't understand why. The aliens began to suspect sabotage, but they couldn't prove anything. Every incident looked like an accident, a technical malfunction, or simple human error. When they investigated, they found nothing but apologetic humans who promised to be more careful. Prime Minister Kethvar called an emergency session of the Galactic Council. The 12 species representatives gathered via hologram, their faces showing various degrees of frustration and confusion. The situation is becoming intolerable, Kethvar announced. Production efficiency across our territories has dropped by 30%. Military readiness is compromised. Our economies are suffering significant losses. It's the humans, growled General Thaxel of the Nexari. They're behind this somehow, but every investigation turns up nothing. How can they be coordinating this? Asked Councillor Merdan of the Valtari. We monitor all their communications. We track their movements. There's no evidence of organization or planning. Perhaps, suggested Dr. Yillith of the Eldereth, we are seeing natural human inefficiency. They may be less capable than we believed. No, Kethvar said firmly. This is too coordinated to be random incompetence. But it's also too subtle to be typical human behavior. They lack the sophistication for this kind of operation. The council members argued for hours, but they couldn't reach a conclusion. The humans appeared to be causing massive disruption across the galaxy, but no one could figure out how or why. On Earth, the Shadow Council monitored the alien discussions with satisfaction. Their intelligence network was vast and sophisticated. They had agents in every major alien government, listening devices in most important facilities, and quantum communication systems that the aliens couldn't detect or intercept. Phase 2 is proceeding perfectly, reported Dr. Patel. Alien productivity is down 35% and falling. Their military effectiveness has been reduced by approximately 20%. Economic losses are mounting daily. Any signs they're catching on? Asked Rodriguez. They suspect sabotage, but they can't prove it, Admiral Chen replied. More importantly, they can't stop it. Every human worker they replace gets replaced by another human who continues the mission. How long before they realize the scope of our infiltration? Asked Dr. Murphy. Dr. Patel consulted her data. Based on their investigation patterns, I estimate 6 to 8 weeks before they understand that we have agents everywhere. But by then, it may not matter. Rodriguez nodded. Begin preparations for Phase 3. It's time to show them what open resistance looks like. On the space station Belhaven, Velkoth was becoming desperate. The human maintenance crew had returned to work, but everything was falling apart faster than they could fix it. Environmental systems failed daily. The reactor required constant attention. The station's artificial gravity fluctuated randomly. Chief Engineer Thompson, Velkoth called to the human supervisor. These malfunctions are becoming dangerous. Perhaps we should request a full inspection. From the Galactic Engineering Corps? Chief Thompson, whose real name was actually Patricia Kim, and who held a doctorate in advanced engineering, looked concerned. I think that's an excellent idea, sir. These old systems are clearly reaching the end of their service life. It might be time for a complete overhaul. What she didn't mention was that the systems were actually in perfect condition. She and her team had been carefully creating the malfunctions, making sure they were serious enough to cause problems but not so severe as to actually endanger lives. The humans might be at war, but they weren't monsters. Velkoth authorized the request for inspection, not knowing that he was playing directly into human hands. The Galactic Engineering Corps was staffed primarily by humans. The inspection team would arrive, find numerous critical flaws in the station's design, and recommend a complete reconstruction project. A project that would take years to complete and cost the Zeltharians billions of credits. Across the galaxy, the pattern continued. Every alien government, military organization, and corporation found itself struggling with mysterious problems that seemed to have no solution. Equipment failed at the worst possible moments. The ultimatum came on a Tuesday. Prime Minister Kethavar appeared on every communication screen in human space, his forearms spread wide in a gesture of absolute authority. Behind him stood representatives of all 12 alien species, their faces grim and threatening. Humans of the galaxy, Kethavar announced, his voice cold with barely controlled rage. Your campaign of sabotage and disruption has been noted and documented. You have 6 standard hours to cease all hostile activities and return to your proper duties. Failure to comply will result in immediate military action against all human settlements. The message ended with a list of demands. Humans would surrender all weapons and defensive equipment. They would submit to constant monitoring. Their movements between worlds would be restricted. Most importantly, they would accept permanent junior status in the Galactic Concordat with no possibility of future advancement. On Earth, Acting President Rodriguez watched the ultimatum with a calm expression. Around him in the war room, the Shadow Council waited for his response. Well, he said quietly, they finally figured it out. Admiral Chen, what's our military readiness? Admiral Chen activated the holographic display. Instead of showing the few dozen patrol ships the aliens expected humanity to possess, the display revealed hundreds of massive warships positioned throughout the galaxy. All fleets are in position and ready for combat, she reported. We have 47 dreadnoughts, 132 heavy cruisers, and over 300 destroyers and support vessels. All ships are equipped with quantum fusion reactors and the latest defensive systems. Rodriguez turned to Dr. Murphy. Biological weapon status? All alien species have been analyzed for vulnerability, Dr. Murphy replied. We have targeted viruses and neurological agents ready for deployment. However, I recommend against their use unless absolutely necessary. They could cause permanent genetic damage. I hope it won't come to that, Rodriguez said. Colonel Torres, what about our ground forces? Colonel Torres had been quiet during most of the war, but now she leaned forward with a predatory smile. 18 million combat-ready soldiers across 47 worlds, sir. All equipped with power armor and enhanced weapon systems. We also have approximately 4 million support personnel who can fight if needed. Rodriguez nodded. The numbers were staggering. While the aliens thought humanity had a few thousand soldiers scattered across their territories, the real human military was larger than most alien species' entire populations. Send the response, Rodriguez ordered. The message that went out to the Galactic Council was brief and direct. No. 6 hours later, the Nexari battle fleet arrived at Earth's outer defensive perimeter. General Thaxel commanded from the bridge of his flagship, confident that a show of force would bring the humans to their senses. Scan the system, he ordered. I want to know the location of every human ship. The tactical officer, a young Nexari named Kixtal, stared at his displays in confusion. Sir, I'm reading massive energy signatures throughout the system. The computer says there are over 100 large vessels, but that can't be correct. Show me, Thaxel demanded. The main screen lit up with tactical data. The Earth system was filled with ships, not the small patrol vessels the Nexari expected, but enormous dreadnoughts that dwarfed anything in the alien fleet. "This must be a sensor malfunction," Thaxel muttered. "Humans don't have ships like these." Captain Lisa Torres stood on the bridge of the human dreadnought Retribution, watching the alien fleet through the view screen. Her ship was 3 times the size of the largest Nexari vessel, powered by a quantum fusion reactor that produced more energy than an entire alien fleet. "Incoming transmission from the alien commander," reported her communications officer. "Put him through," Torres ordered. General Thaxel's insect-like face appeared on the screen, his compound eyes reflecting confusion and growing fear. "This is General Thaxel of the Nexari military," he announced. "You are ordered to surrender immediately. Your resistance is futile," Torres smiled. "General, this is Captain Torres of the Human Defense Force. You have entered our territory with hostile intent. You have exactly 10 minutes to withdraw, or we will consider your presence an act of war. You cannot threaten us," Thaxel screeched. "We are the Nexari. We have conquered a dozen star systems." "You conquered primitive worlds with medieval technology," Torres replied calmly. "Today you face humanity. I suggest you reconsider your position." Thaxel cut the transmission and turned to his weapons officer. "Target their lead ship. Show them what Nexari firepower can accomplish." The alien fleet opened fire, launching plasma bolts and missile salvos at the human dreadnoughts. The weapons struck the human ship's shields and simply disappeared, absorbed by defensive systems that the aliens had never seen before. "Impossible," Thaxel whispered. "No shields are that strong." Torres watched the alien attack with professional interest. The Nexari weapons were powerful by galactic standards, but human defensive technology was 50 years more advanced. The shields barely registered the impact. "Return fire," she ordered. "Minimum power. We want prisoners, not corpses." The human response was devastating. Energy beams that could crack a planet's crust struck the alien ships at 1% power. Nexari vessels exploded instantly, their hulls vaporized by weapons they couldn't comprehend. In less than 10 minutes, the entire alien fleet was either destroyed or drifting powerless in space. General Thaxel found himself trapped on a crippled ship, surrounded by human boarding parties. The soldiers who captured him wore powered armor that made them look like walking tanks. Their weapons hummed with barely contained energy. Their movements were precise and coordinated in a way that spoke of extensive training and combat experience. "You're coming with us, General," announced the squad leader, a woman whose voice was amplified by her armor's speakers. "Humanity has some questions for you." Similar scenes played out across the galaxy. Alien fleets that approached human settlements found themselves outgunned, outmaneuvered, and completely overwhelmed. Ships that had terrorized primitive worlds for centuries were reduced to scrap metal in minutes. On the Karan homeworld, Colonel Marcus Webb led an assault force of enhanced human marines against the planetary defense grid. The Karan warriors were legendary for their fighting ability, but they had never faced anything like this. Human soldiers moved through the alien defenses like ghosts, their armor providing complete protection against Karan weapons. The aliens' proud warrior tradition crumbled in the face of human tactical superiority and overwhelming technological advantage. "This is impossible," growled War Chief Graktor, as human soldiers surrounded his command bunker. "The Koran have never been defeated in battle. You've never fought humans before," Colonel Webb replied as his troops secured the facility. "We don't fight for honor or glory. We fight to win." The psychological impact was as devastating as the military defeat. For centuries, the alien species had seen themselves as the dominant powers in the galaxy. They had technologies that seemed miraculous to primitive worlds. They had fleets that could destroy entire civilizations. Humanity revealed all of that to be an illusion. Human ships were faster, stronger, and more advanced than anything the aliens possessed. Human soldiers were better trained, better equipped, and more effective than any alien military force. Human technology was so far ahead of galactic standards that the two civilizations might as well have been separated by millennia. "How?" demanded Prime Minister Kethvar when he was brought before Rodriguez as a prisoner. "How did you hide all of this? We monitored your worlds, your factories, your research facilities." Rodriguez leaned back in his chair, studying the defeated alien leader. "You monitored what we wanted you to see. Our real military-industrial complex was built in deep space, in asteroid fields and hidden nebulae. Every human worker you thought was just maintaining your equipment was actually gathering intelligence and building our war machine. But the technology, Kethvar protested. These ships, these weapons, they're beyond anything we believed possible. You assumed human science was primitive because we shared our basic technologies with you, Rodriguez explained. We gave you simple computers and basic medical knowledge. We never showed you our quantum processors, our fusion reactors, our gravitational manipulation systems. Why would we give our best weapons to potential enemies? The war lasted exactly 72 hours. That was how long it took for human forces to capture or destroy every major alien military installation in the galaxy. The great fleets that had maintained order for centuries were reduced to floating debris. The mighty fortresses that had never fallen were occupied by human soldiers. The aliens surrendered unconditionally. In the aftermath, as alien leaders sat in human holding cells awaiting trial, they began to understand the magnitude of their mistake. They had seen humanity's restraint and cooperation as weakness. They had interpreted human patience as subservience. They had believed that spreading humans across the galaxy would make them dependent and controllable. Instead, humanity had used those 50 years to study their enemies, infiltrate their societies, and prepare for this exact moment. Every human who worked on an alien ship learned its weaknesses. Every human who lived in an alien city mapped its defenses. The courtroom was silent as former Prime Minister Kethvar stood before the judgment panel. The trial had lasted 3 weeks and the evidence against him was overwhelming. War crimes, genocide against primitive species, and the assassination of President Vasquez were just the beginning of a list that seemed to go on forever. President Rodriguez, now confirmed in his position by a galaxy-wide election, read the verdict personally. Behind him sat representatives from every species in the galaxy, not just the former Concordat members, but also delegates from the dozens of primitive worlds that had suffered under alien rule. Kethvar of the Zeltharian Empire, Rodriguez announced, "You have been found guilty of crimes against sentient life. However, this court has decided that execution would serve no purpose. Instead, you will spend the remainder of your life working to repair the damage you have caused. You will help rebuild the worlds your people destroyed. You will serve the species you oppressed, and you will live with the knowledge that your victims have chosen mercy over revenge." Kethvar stared at Rodriguez in confusion. "I don't understand. Why spare me? Why spare any of us? We showed you no mercy." Rodriguez stepped down from the judgment platform and approached the fallen alien leader. When he spoke, his voice was quiet but firm. "Because mercy is what separates civilization from barbarism. Because President Vasquez believed that all species could learn to live together peacefully. And because humanity refuses to become the monsters you were." The transformation of galactic society began immediately. The old Concordat was dissolved and replaced with the Galactic Federation, a democratic body where every species had equal representation regardless of their technological level or military power. The charter was simple. All sentient life had inherent dignity and rights that could not be taken away. Admiral Chen found herself in charge of the largest rebuilding project in galactic history. Human fleets that had destroyed alien military bases now carried construction equipment and medical supplies to devastated worlds. The same soldiers who had crushed alien resistance now worked alongside former enemies to rebuild shattered cities. "It's ironic," she remarked to Colonel Torres as they watched human and Quran workers collaborate on a new hospital. "6 months ago, we were preparing to destroy each other. Now we're building something together." Torres nodded, observing the mixed crews with satisfaction. The Quran are actually excellent builders when they're not focused on conquest. Their warrior discipline translates well to construction work. The economic transformation was equally dramatic. Dr. Patel oversaw the creation of new trade networks that benefited all species equally. The resources that had once flowed only to the most powerful civilizations were now shared based on need rather than military strength. "The Valtari are adapting surprisingly well," she reported to the weekly council meeting. "They're using their merchant skills to establish fair trade relationships with the primitive worlds. Turns out they're much better at business when they're not exploiting their partners." Dr. Murphy had perhaps the most important job of all, helping alien species adapt to their new reality. Many aliens struggled with the concept of equality after centuries of believing in their own superiority. "The Thessians are making excellent progress," he explained during his monthly psychological assessment. Their collective mindset actually makes them ideal for cooperative projects. Once they accepted the new paradigm, they embraced it completely. "What about the Nexari?" asked Rodriguez. Dr. Murphy's expression became more serious. "They're having the most difficulty. Their entire culture was built around military dominance. Without that, many of them feel lost. We're working with their leadership to find new sources of purpose and identity. The changes weren't always smooth. Some alien groups resisted the new order, launching terrorist attacks or trying to restore the old power structures. But human intelligence networks, refined during 50 years of preparation, quickly identified and neutralized these threats. More importantly, the former victim species began to assert themselves. Worlds that had been enslaved for generations suddenly had voices in galactic government. Technologies that had been restricted to the advanced species were now shared freely with everyone. The Keth, a species that had been conquered by the Nexari 2 centuries earlier, became skilled diplomats in the new Federation. The Ilari, whose homeworld had been strip-mined by Zeltharian corporations, discovered they had a natural talent for environmental restoration. "It's remarkable," observed Dr. Sarah Kim, the Federation's new head of species development. "These civilizations were never primitive. They were just suppressed, given the opportunity. They're contributing innovations that surpass anything the old Concordat ever achieved." The most significant change was in how conflicts were resolved. The old system of might makes right was replaced with mediation, negotiation, and mutual cooperation. When disputes arose, they were settled through discussion rather than conquest. "We've had 3 potential wars in the past year," reported General Patricia Santos, the new head of Federation Security. "All 3 were resolved through diplomatic intervention and economic cooperation. The species involved are now close allies." 5 years after President Vasquez's assassination, Rodriguez stood in the same assembly hall where she had died. But the chamber looked very different now. Instead of 12 dominant species looking down on lesser members, hundreds of civilizations sat as equals in a circular arrangement that symbolized their shared status. The memorial statue of President Vasquez stood at the center of the hall, her hand extended in a gesture of welcome. The inscription read, "Elena Vasquez. She believed all species could live in peace." "Today marks the 5th anniversary of the tragedy that changed our galaxy," Rodriguez addressed the assembled delegates. President Vasquez died believing in a vision of cooperation and mutual respect. The war that followed was humanity's answer to those who murdered that vision. He paused, looking around the hall at representatives from over 200 species. "But the peace we have built is President Vasquez's true memorial. We have proven that her dream was not naive idealism but achievable reality. We have shown that strength used in service of justice creates something far more valuable than strength used for domination." The ceremony concluded with the annual progress report, delivered jointly by human and alien officials. The statistics were impressive. Galactic poverty had been reduced by 80%. Technological advancement had accelerated dramatically as knowledge was shared freely. Military conflicts had virtually disappeared, replaced by economic and cultural cooperation. But the most important change was harder to quantify. Children of different species grew up together, learning that diversity was strength rather than weakness. Scientists from dozens of worlds collaborated on projects that benefited everyone. Artists and philosophers created works that reflected the perspectives of hundreds of civilizations. After the ceremony, Rodriguez visited the observation deck where he had spoken those 3 fateful words 5 years earlier. Admiral Chen joined him, both of them looking out at the stars. "Do you think she would approve?" Chen asked, referring to President Vasquez. Rodriguez considered the question carefully. "I think she would be proud that we chose to build rather than destroy. But I also think she would remind us that this is just the beginning. True peace isn't something you achieve once. It's something you choose every day." "Any regrets about how we handled the war?" Chen asked. Rodriguez shook his head. "The aliens needed to learn that there are consequences for murdering innocent people. But more importantly, they needed to learn that mercy is stronger than revenge, that justice is more powerful than retribution." He gestured toward the busy space lanes visible through the viewport, where ships from dozens of species traveled together in peace. "Look at what we've built together. The Koran design our ships. The Eldrith advance our science. The Valtari manage our trade. The Thessians coordinate our communications. Even the Nexari have found their place as peacekeepers and protectors. And the humans? Chen asked with a slight smile. Rodriguez chuckled. We do what we've always done best. We adapt, we learn, and we help everyone else reach their potential. It turns out that's a much better use of our talents than war. As if to emphasize his point, a group of young beings from various species floated past the viewport in a training exercise. Human instructors worked alongside alien teachers, preparing the next generation for a galaxy where cooperation was the norm rather than the exception. The memorial service for President Vasquez had become an annual celebration of progress and unity. What had begun as a day of mourning had transformed into a festival of hope. Representatives from every world came to share their achievements and plan for the future. In the end, humanity had done something unprecedented in galactic history. They had won a war and then used their victory to create a better world for everyone, including their former enemies. They had proven that the greatest strength was not the ability to destroy, but the wisdom to build. The galaxy had learned that when you kill hope, you don't destroy it. You transform it into something far more dangerous, the determination to prove that a better world is possible.